Hello there. Welcome to the very first episode of And Action, ITV's movie review show. I'm your host, Kevin Lepper, joined by Hunter Valenzuela. We'll be giving all our thoughts on a range of movies, from Hollywood's most iconic to the films that have just hit theaters. We're kicking off our first episode with arguably the most iconic movie franchise of all time. When director George Lucas released his film in 1977, he had no idea the cultural impact his series set in a galaxy far, far away would have. 44 years later, people all around the world are still going crazy for the universe he created. Of course, I'm talking about Star Wars. We're going to be talking all about the 9 Skywalker saga films and the 2 spin-off films set in the Star Wars franchise. So strap in, because this is where the fun begins. So, Hunter, thank you for joining me on the first episode of And Action.
Thank you for having me.
I talk about Star Wars literally every day of my life, so this should be pretty easy for me.
Okay.
So I think we're just going to go through the movies in release order, starting with the originals, and then the prequels, and then the newer era of Disney films.
Okay.
Kind of give our thoughts, what we liked, what we didn't like, if we would change anything, and then we'll give an overall rating of each film at the end. So,
sounds good to me.
The one that started it all, Star Wars, originally called Star Wars, later changed to Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. It's iconic.
Oh yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Such a classic. It's the quintessential hero's journey story. I've studied the original Star Wars movie in 2 of my college classes so far, just because it's the hero's journey story, and it's the one that started it all.
It has like a very clear and concise 3-act structure to it. There's like a clear first act, second act, third act, and all of it kind of builds off of the next point. And it's something, while science fiction has been something that was made earlier in time, way before that, before Star Wars was a thing, because obviously Star Trek came out in the 60s. The biggest thing was when Star Wars brought it to mainstream to a film, it blew up like a wildfire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did. And the cultural impact that movie had and what that turned into, I don't think George Lucas knew the impact his little science fiction film would have. I mean, because that was the beginning of the craze of movie merchandise, of action figures, and merchandising was you can attribute a lot of Star Wars success to its merchandising and to the action figure market. Everybody was going crazy for movie posters and everything. But Star Wars: A New Hope, I mean, it's the classic Star Wars film. They're really, thinking back, I don't think I would really change anything about the movie. Obviously, George Lucas doesn't feel the same, because every few years it seems like he goes back and redoes something with the special editions. But to me, if there was one thing I would change, and it's not even that big of a deal, and to be honest, I don't even think I would touch it, but the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan and Vader, just because it doesn't compare to lightsaber fights in the rest of the franchise.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever seen Scene 38 reimagined on YouTube? That would be cool. I don't think that would fit into the movie at all, but it was definitely a cool concept to kind of see that fight reimagined.
I did like watching that. Well, one thing I will say, I do enjoy it for the purpose of these are two old characters who are going out in a battle. And it's basically not one of just it's not one that's just meant to be over the top. It's meant to be I guess I'm trying to find the right word for it.
Emotionally driven.
It's emotionally driven, where if you've known these characters for as long as they've been together, they know each other. They understand that this is how everything is. They know where everything's set, and there's nothing to really prove other than it's just one last battle.
Yeah. We might be seeing a rematch between Vader and Kenobi in the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which is very exciting. So overall, I mean, I would give A New Hope probably an 8 out of 10, because it lacks some qualities that I enjoy from other Star Wars movies, but at the end of the day, it's the one that started it all. It's a classic. It's the hero's journey story. I give it an 8 out of 10.
I would give it I'd say I'd give it an 8.5. My biggest gripes with A New Hope are that there's a couple of odd cuts that when you see them once, it's just you tend to notice it. But outside of that, it's a fantastic movie.
For its time too, it definitely held up. You know what's funny though is because Star Wars wouldn't be Star Wars without John Williams and his score he provides for these movies. If Star Wars would have had a kind of retro kind of synth soundtrack instead of John Williams' orchestra, it would not have been as successful.
Oh, yeah.
And I just think that's fun to think about. So moving on from Episode 4, A New Hope, we go to Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Arguably one of the greatest movie sequels of all time.
Yep.
The Empire Strikes Back. I think if you ask most people what they think the best Star Wars movie is, they're going to say Empire, for good reason. It gives us arguably the most iconic plot twist in movie history. Luke's training is super interesting, and on Dagobah with Yoda. Something I don't think gets talked about enough is the Battle of Hoth. The Battle of Hoth is one of my favorite sequences in all of Star Wars.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love the AT-AT walkers in the snow. And of course, the I am your father line. Empire Strikes Back, it's classic, it's iconic.
My favorite thing about Empire has to be that, building off of your previous point, John Williams' score in that one is probably my all-time favorite. There's just so many good, there's many good pieces out of that OST that I personally just love. And anytime I hear it, I'm like, oh, it's like it fit perfectly when it was shown in Empire. Obviously, like all of the characters were built like they were more expanded. Everybody got a lot more screen time, and the Battle of Hoth obviously was probably one of the best, arguably, conflicts in the Star Wars universe. Mainly because it was the very first conventional ground warfare actually shown, and with the work that miniatures that they use, it still holds up to this day.
Absolutely. What I love about Star Wars is kind of ILM and how they've created these breathtaking images from miniatures and their model work. If you watch the behind the scenes stuff, it's so impressive what they're able to do. Another thing about Empire Strikes Back too, regardless of how you feel about their relationship, Han and Leia, this was their movie. And I know our friend Noah would enjoy that. But you get Luke's training on Dagobah. You learn more about the Jedi through Yoda. You kind of go through his journey. You get to see how Luke is still, yes, he's going through this Jedi training, but he's still the impulsive farm boy that he is, because obviously he hasn't completed his training, but he knows his friends are in danger, so he's going to give up on that and go try and save his friends, which gives us one of I think the best lightsaber duels in Star Wars is that first duel between Luke and Vader on Cloud City. Just the one shot when they're about to square off and they ignite their lightsabers, and it's kind of a wide shot with their silhouettes. It's such a classic. I've used that as an example in film class too, and obviously the "No, I am your father" line, arguably one of the most iconic lines in cinema.
Oh, absolutely.
And just The Empire Strikes Back. And the good guys don't win in The Empire Strikes Back. It's that very solid middle movie of a trilogy where kind of all the characters are at their lowest point. And that sets up the next movie. And just The Empire Strikes Back. Near perfection, if you ask me. If you ask me what I would change about that movie, I don't think I could come up with an answer.
It's hard for me to nitpick that one as well, especially even with a lot of people saying that they don't really like the remasters that George Lucas made. Arguably the best ones were in Empire, because he didn't really alter it too much. The biggest changes were on the Cloud City of Bespin, where instead of it just being a bunch of blank white corridors, it's now just a bunch of giant open windows where you see a living and breathing city.
Which helps the world building tremendously. It really fills out Bespin and Cloud City a lot too. Another change that was made in the special edition with Empire Strikes Back is they put Ian McNirbid, who plays the Emperor, as the hologram. That's another thing about Empire too, is we see that, because in A New Hope we assume that Darth Vader is the big bad, because the Emperor doesn't really get mentioned that much. In Empire, we see that Vader has somebody that he reports to. He's not the overarching big bad villain. which is really cool to see because you kind of think that he is, but he's not. And that sets up the Emperor's role in Return of the Jedi. So if you have any more final thoughts about Empire Strikes Back?
I think I'm ready to give it a score.
Yeah, I think I am too. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say The Empire Strikes Back is a 10 out of 10 Star Wars movie.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that.
I do think, without a doubt, it's the best of the 11 films that have been made so far. So after Empire Strikes Back, obviously they got some pressure to live up to after that one. Return of the Jedi. I love Return of the Jedi.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I think Empire is the best, but I think of the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi has to be my favorite of the three. It's a fun movie. I love the Jabba's Palace opening sequence.
Yep.
Granted, I think it's a little long. They could, because like about a third of the movie takes place on Tatooine in Jabba's Palace there. I think they could have shortened that a little bit, but overall, I don't really have any complaints. I loved seeing kind of Luke come to terms with the fact that Darth Vader is his father in this movie, and that conversation between him and Vader on that bridge when Vader says, or Luke says, like, I know you were once Anakin Skywalker, and then Vader goes, that name no longer has any meaning for me. Just seeing that dialogue between those two characters and kind of working out their past was really cool to see. And then the lightsaber fight on the second Death Star between Luke and Vader.
That is
one of the best lightsaber fights in Star Wars.
That's personally my favorite. For the biggest reason for that is you can tell that like there's conflict on both sides, and it's mainly a game of just trying to convince like one or the other to drop their guard and switch sides. And my favorite scene is when Luke is hiding from Vader, and the use of colors that the lightsabers are giving off shows the conflict, where there's the green on like illuminating half of Luke's face, and then the red illuminating half of Vader's. So you can see that visual conflict. It's a very clear and concise motive of show don't tell.
Yes.
And it's fantastic.
That fight too is one of the most emotionally charged lightsaber fights too in the series. The only one that I think rivals it in that category would be Anakin and Obi-Wan in Episode 3. But I love that in lightsaber fights when there's an emotional weight to the duel. It just adds so much more to the fight and to the conflict. But yeah, Return of the Jedi. It starts off. It's fun. That Tatooine sequence is fun. And you knew that I was the biggest Boba Fett fanboy growing up. So you might think that it wasn't my favorite because Boba Fett died in that one, but there hasn't been a second in my life where I believed that Boba Fett actually died in that Sarlacc pit.
Yeah.
And I was right. With this latest season of The Mandalorian, and now he's getting his own spin-off show. I've been waiting for a Boba Fett spin-off show for 21 years. So I'm excited we're finally getting it.
Okay.
But yeah, Return of the Jedi. A lot of people think that it's definitely not their favorite of the original trilogy, which I can understand. You have the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi, which personally I like the Ewoks. I don't have an issue with them.
They weren't too bad.
It's funny how they were able to basically crumble an empire though of these elite troopers that came down to their planet. But I like speeder bikes. I ride a motorcycle, so speeder bikes are obviously gonna fancy me a little bit. But yeah, you got any other thoughts of Return of the Jedi?
No, I think we touched everything that needed to.
And the ending too is arguably the best ending in Star Wars, with Anakin's redemptions, saving Luke, and then the Force ghosts on Endor as Luke is kind of staring off at him. Now, on the topic of special edition changes, when Return of the Jedi originally came out, they had the Yub Nub score on the ending. With the special edition, they changed it to Victory Celebration, and that's one change I really like. I like Yub Nub, but Victory Celebration is one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars music, and I think it just fits that scene so much better.
Okay. I'll have to watch those back and forth at some point just to see which one would be more fitting. But yeah, I got nothing else to add.
Yeah, I'm going to give Return of the Jedi a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with, I wouldn't necessarily put it as a 9 out of 10. I'd give it an 8. There's definitely some changes that I did enjoy. It obviously had some of my favorite scenes, but overall, there definitely could have been some improvements in some areas, obviously like on Tatooine, but nothing too crazy.
I'm going to change my score. We're dropping it down to an 8.7.
Okay.
8.7 out of
All right.
10. So, moving on, that was 1983. We don't get another Star Wars movie until 1999.
Yep.
So we're going back in time. We're going the origin stories of Anakin Skywalker with the Star Wars prequel trilogy, kicking off with The Phantom Menace, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I'm going to be honest, not my favorite.
And you know what? That's understandable. The Phantom Menace isn't really, it's not like in a very action-oriented film. There are some high points in it where obviously you have like the pod racing scene, you have the Duel of the Fates that comes towards the climax, but the central conflict is not as large scale as you would think it is. It's mainly just kind of the stepping stone to build off of the later two movies and animation series.
The plot is definitely a miss for me of The Phantom Menace. Obviously, it's kind of trying to establish what the galaxy is like at that point in time, and you know, I feel about it. For me, politics in Star Wars has never been my favorite. There are definitely people that like that, and obviously, good for them. But especially growing up, all I wanted to see in a Star Wars movie was you know, the pew pew and the laser swords and everything. And The Phantom Menace definitely has that at the end, but for most of the movie, it just seems like a lot of discussion and stuff that doesn't really interest me. The only things I really kind of genuinely enjoyed from The Phantom Menace was Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul. And it's funny too, because I was never a really big Qui-Gon Jinn fan, but I'm currently reading the book Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, which is basically the origin story of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and it kind of really shows Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship before The Phantom Menace, and kind of how they're kind of really not fit for each other, but they have to go through changes and learn how to cooperate with each other. And you also really get to learn how Qui-Gon's not your traditional Jedi. He's not afraid to go outside the rules and to do whatever he thinks is right. And I think that's what a Jedi should be. Big thing of the prequel trilogy is kind of giving this exposition of the Jedi Order and kind of showing their flaws, where I think Qui-Gon Jinn he saw those flaws while he was in the Jedi Order and was able to kind of work as he saw fit, which I think just makes him a really interesting character. And this book is definitely making me kind of fall in love with Qui-Gon Jinn's character too. That's another thing for the prequel trilogy that we're going to get into, is that, for me at least, the outside media outside of the movies really makes it more enjoyable for me. And I haven't seen The Phantom Menace in a while, but after I finish Master and Apprentice and I go back and I rewatch The Phantom Menace, I can guarantee I'm going to enjoy it more because I have more of that backstory and stuff. But, I mean, there are definitely things I would change about this movie. I love pod racing. I think the pod racing sequence was a little long.
A little bit. It definitely could have been cut down by maybe like 5 minutes. But even then, it was still a very, overall, like one of the big highlights of the movie.
Yeah. I think just this movie kind of struggled with pacing a little bit. Definitely not the best paced movie out of any Star Wars film. And, you know, Jar Jar Binks, love him or hate him, he's in this movie.
He's in it very prominently.
Yeah, and well, you know, it's funny too, because think about it, he's the most important character in Star Wars. Without him, we wouldn't have the rest of the story. It's just fun to think about. Jar Jar Binks is solely responsible for the demise of the galaxy, but it's fine. Personally, I never hated Jar Jar. Definitely was not my favorite. But I definitely understand why people didn't like him. You know, you got, it's just kind of a slow movie. There wasn't much to it. And who knows, maybe I'll come back to this video one day after I reevaluate the film and I completely change my opinion, because I definitely have had some very strong change of opinions with Star Wars films, as we'll get to later. But as of right now, as we currently sit in June 2021, I am not the biggest fan of The Phantom Menace. Yeah. So with that, I have changes, but we'd be here forever if I was going to talk about what I would change in the movie. So do you have anything you would personally?
I can't really name anything off the top of my head that we haven't already covered. So I think we're good to go.
I do love that lightsaber duel between
yeah.
Obi-Wan, Maul, and
It's a fantastic
Qui-Gon.
one, yeah.
It is. It's very good. How Darth Maul didn't die, it's beyond me. But, I'm glad he didn't because he was an excellent character in the Clone Wars. So with that, I'm going to give The Phantom Menace, and I don't like giving Star Wars movies low scores, but I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. I think I'll have to match you with a 6 out of 10 because it is a film that I did enjoy, but there's just a lot of parts that either went on too long or didn't really serve that much relevancy to the overall structure of the rest of the films.
Yeah, that's fair. Moving on, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. This was the Star Wars movie I think I watched the most growing up as a kid. I have many memories of just sitting down and watching this film. Mostly just because I like the looks of it. I like the flashy lightsaber fight on Geonosis and everything. But thinking back on Episode 2 critically, it's far from a perfect movie.
Yes.
I don't want to say it's almost as I'm not going to say almost as bad, but it's definitely not my favorite, similar to how Episode 1 is not my favorite. I like the later parts of the movie with the Geonosis arena battle. Seeing Yoda come in with the clones was really cool. I also like the sequence of Obi-Wan going to Kamino to kind of learning about the clone army and how he has absolutely no clue what's going on. But when he gets there, he has to act like he does. That's just so funny. But where Attack the Clones falls flat for me is, and I don't like saying this, but it's Anakin and Padme in this movie.
I love both Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman as actors and actresses respectively, but it's hard to watch.
Oh, 100%.
I don't agree with a lot of the dialogue that was kept in the film.
Physically makes me cringe when I'm watching it. There's that one scene when they're on Coruscant getting ready to leave, and Anakin's just kind of really weirdly staring at Padme, and she goes, "Don't look at me like that," and then he goes, "Why not?" And then she goes, "You're making me uncomfortable." And that's just one of many examples of cringy dialogue in Attack of the Clones. And of course, we have the scene on Naboo where they're staring out at the lake, and Anakin says his iconic line, "I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating," and it gets everywhere. If that's his style of flirting, I cannot believe it actually worked out for him.
The one part I don't really enjoy about the Attack of the Clones is mainly just like a minor nitpick, but at the very beginning of the film, you are talking about the assassination of Padme, and it's basically a game of telephone going down, like how it's going to be orchestrated. It starts with Sidious telling Dooku to do it, and Dooku hires Jango, and Jango hires somebody else to do
Zam
it.
Wessel,
Zam Wessel, and Zam Wessel uses a
hires
robot.
a droid,
and that
droid uses some centipede worm things.
And
it's funny.
If you think about it, it's way too overcomplicated for no reason other than this person needs to be dead.
It's more comedic than serious, I think.
It just took me out of it.
Yeah, and I was never a big fan of that whole Coruscant opening. For whatever reason, I couldn't give you like a specific reason why, but it was never really my thing. And I don't have any issues with Hayden Christensen as an actor in this. I think he did exactly what he was told to do by George Lucas. It's just that George Lucas doesn't know how to write great dialogue. And we see that evidently in Attack the Clones. I'm also, the lightsaber fight choreography, cinematography at the end of the movie between Dooku and Anakin, and then Dooku and Yoda. There's a couple shots of them, just the cameras close on their face, and they're just kind of swinging their sabers.
You don't really get to see too much.
It's not a good visual of a lightsaber fight.
Right.
How do you feel about the prequels' kind of over-the-top, flashy lightsaber duels?
Personally, I tend to enjoy it mainly because, kind of from like a filmmaker standpoint, there's a lot of choreography and a lot of action that's being put into it, and it kind of also fits in with the scene itself. Just overall, Jedi are supposed to be over the top, very powerful duelists.
Yeah.
And it would make sense that it's very over the top and flashy on screen.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Because, I mean, at that time, you have Jedi kind of, not in their prime, but, you know, the Jedi Order is still prominent and everything, so lightsaber duels are happening. So, Attack of the Clones, there are definitely things I would change about it. Again, not going to get into it because we would be here forever. You got anything else you want to add?
I can't think of anything.
I'm going to give Attack of the Clones a 7 out of 10. A little more forgiving than Phantom Menace, but still not the best.
I'd give it 6.5. Not my favorite, but it still has some enjoyable qualities in it.
I would agree. Now, before we jump to episode 3, and obviously episode 3 came out before this, but we got, in 2008, the Clone Wars television show. And we were talking earlier about how the outside media kind of helps enhance the prequel trilogy. This is the biggest example of how it can do that. What the Clone Wars TV show does, it flushes out the characters incredibly. You really get to understand Anakin's fall to the dark side through the Clone Wars, whereas in the movies it might be a little jarring, like how quickly he goes from light to dark. And the Clone Wars just flushes that out beautifully. Also, the world building that the Clone Wars is able to do and kind of establish what the galaxy is like during this era, it's amazing. So the Clone Wars definitely helped me enjoy the prequel trilogy a little bit more, and I think it's really cool how outside media has the ability to do that. But jumping into it, what's I think is heavily regarded as a lot of people's favorite Star Wars movie, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. It's just, it's good.
I'm not going to lie. This is one of my personal favorites for a multitude of reasons. As a filmmaker standpoint, it's got a lot of things that are done extremely well. It's well paced. Everything to me seems like it works. Every scene kind of flows in with the next. And the biggest thing that I do enjoy is just obviously the scope of everything, the world building. This is where I think the CGI was also like at its peak. It didn't look as rubbery or just fake as it did like earlier on. This is also a movie that holds a special place in my heart because this was the very first Star Wars movie I saw in theaters at the age of 5.
Really?
So I do have a conflict of interest.
Yeah. I remember I could have seen it in theaters when I was 5, but I didn't. So, but yeah, Revenge of the Sith. It's just a very well-paced movie, great action, improvements on the dialogue for sure, and it's tragic too, because that's where you get the downfall of Anakin Skywalker, and that duel at the end between Anakin and Obi-Wan is one of the most heart-wrenching, emotional duels in Star Wars. And yeah, I wouldn't change much about it. I think it's great as it is.
The cinematography, the choreography, the composing of the music, the OST. Honestly, everything about it. This was probably George Lucas in his prime.
I would agree. Revenge of the Sith is definitely the best of the 3 prequels, and I think a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah.
So, I would give Revenge of the Sith a 8 out of 10.
I would definitely give it a strong 9.5.
Wow, okay. I like it. I like it. So, 10 years later, Star Wars is back. It's 2015.
Yep.
We're going 30 years past Return of the Jedi with the sequel trilogy. We're kicking it off, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Gonna preface this with saying, this is my favorite Star Wars movie. This is the first Star Wars movie I saw in theaters. I love every single thing about this film. And a lot of people have complaints about this movie that it was too similar to A New Hope. There are definitely similar plot elements in this story, but in a way I feel like that was the point because this was the first Star Wars movie we got in 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think J.J. Abrams wanted to ease people back into Star Wars And that's what he did with The Force Awakens. He gave us something we were already familiar with, so that way we can kind of ease ourselves back into Star Wars, and then from there we can go wherever we want, which we do with the next movie, The Last Jedi. But Force Awakens is such a fun movie. I think the action is great. I think it's a great introduction to these new characters. The music in The Force Awakens is great. I love the music. I think the humor in The Force Awakens is really good. And it's just a fun movie. It's well paced. It checks off all the boxes I want in a Star Wars movie. And I love it. I love every single thing about it.
I did enjoy this movie as well when it came out. I still do. Don't get me wrong. It's just, obviously, I still kind of see it as just retreading a lot of similar story beats. The biggest thing, you can say what you will about George Lucas, but when he was making the prequel trilogy, he knew better than to retell the same story again. But it was on Abrams' side of things, it was the safest bet to make. And some of the scenes in there were actually very well made. The scene with Kylo Ren and Han Solo, I enjoy that for mainly its dialogue, the cinematography.
There's a really cool thing about that scene too, is because obviously we know Kylo Ren is a conflicted character. That makes it very clear in the movie that he kind of has a hard time dealing with this conflict in his head. Right before he kills Han Solo, the light on his face is half blue, half red, kind of symbolizing that conflict, you know, half light, half dark. But once he makes up his mind is that he's going to kill his father is when the sun gets drained. And that blue on his face completely gets overtaken by red. I made a presentation about that in one of my film classes, and that symbolism of color was just super cool.
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was one of my favorite scenes in the film. And of the sequel trilogy, I would say that this is probably one of my favorites that has come out. So this one holds a nice place in my heart because this is the one that I saw in theaters when I was in high school. I still knew I got to enjoy a film and basically remembered what it was like.
I love the lightsaber fight on Starkiller Base too, because I feel like it was a good hybrid between the really grounded kind of emotional duels in the original trilogy and the kind of over-the-top flashy duels of the prequel trilogy. Plus the cinematography of that fight with the blue and red sabers glowing in the dark forest. I think it was visually very appealing. So, although it's my favorite Star Wars movie, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
It's very similar in plot elements to some other Star Wars films, but I love it regardless. 8.5 out of 10.
I think I'll give it an 8. I do enjoy it, but there are some things that I would say that I would improve, but overall, still a good movie.
Yeah. Moving on, before we get to episode 8, we get our first spin-off film with Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, which is the story of how the rebels got the Death Star plans from A New Hope. I liked Rogue One.
I absolutely love Rogue One. Of the spin-off movies, this was the one that I felt it didn't need to be there, but I'm glad it was for the sole purpose of it had a lot to say. It told you how everything was organized and how things came to fruition. And it seemed like to me, obviously a lot of the characters, they seemed like they were a bit forgettable. It was hard to kind of like memorize all of these characters. But my favorite thing about this movie was its third act.
The third act was incredible.
The climax of the battle on Scarif, and both on like the ground and in space, was completely over the top and was what I would set the bar to be as one of the best battles in Star Wars.
The third act in Rogue One puts the wars in Star Wars. It was straight up a space war movie, and it was so good. And you know, I like the characters in Rogue One. I wish there was a little bit more exposition for some of them. A lot of complaints people have about this film is that the first 2 acts are kind of slow. In a way, I have to agree with them. But I think the third act definitely pays off for that. And the cinematography in this film is just beautiful. And how everybody, you know, it's funny too, because when you're joking around with some friends and you're trying to spoil a movie, you always say like, oh, everybody dies in the end. that actually happens in Rogue One.
Yeah.
Which I think is funny. Plus, we get the Darth Vader hallway scene. I remember my jaw dropped in theaters when I saw that scene. It was absolutely incredible.
I still get chills thinking about it.
So I'm going to give Rogue One an 8 out of 10.
I will. I'll match you with that one.
Yeah.
8 out of 10. It's a fairly good movie, and I did enjoy it.
Yeah, it's underrated a little bit, in my opinion. So then we get to the most divisive movie in the Star Wars franchise, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, written and directed by Rian Johnson. I'll tell you what, I was not a fan of this film the first time I saw it. And it wasn't until the beginning of quarantine when I rewatched it with an open mind. Now it's my second favorite Star Wars movie. I think it's the second best Star Wars movie now. I absolutely love this movie because with The Last Jedi, I think it's a challenging film that really makes you think. If you just watch it on a surface level, I don't think you're going to get it all like you would if you just kind of casually watched it. The themes of failure in The Last Jedi are so prominent, but that's such a good lesson to learn. This movie has my favorite quote in all of Star Wars from Yoda. It's the greatest teacher failure is. And that's such a true thing and such an important lesson to learn. The cinematography in this movie, hands down in my opinion, the best cinematography of any Star Wars movie. It is visually stunning. Luke's character in The Last Jedi, was not a fan of it the first time I saw this movie, but after I thought about it, I'm like, I absolutely love Luke's character arc in this journey. And you know, people say that it's like, oh, that's not how Luke Skywalker would behave. It's exactly how Luke Skywalker would behave. He's always been the whiny kind of impulsive farm boy. And for him to exile himself, that's not the first time we've seen a Jedi go into exile after failure. Like, it makes sense. And by the end of the movie, Luke Skywalker, you know, force projects himself across the galaxy, arguably the most powerful force feat we've ever seen in Star Wars, and sacrifices himself to save the Resistance. Is that not like the most Jedi thing that you can do? So for people to say that this wasn't Luke Skywalker or this was out of character for him, I think it's ridiculous. But I digress. What are your thoughts on Last Jedi?
Well, I kind of stand on the other side of this picket fence because there's just a lot of things that obviously it was set up pretty good. It just seemed like not necessarily Luke Skywalker's character, but it seemed like a lot of different characters were just acting either completely out of line or just something that they wouldn't necessarily like do in the previous film. To me, it just seemed like Leia pretty much deranking Poe immediately after saving the entire fleet. It seemed like it was necessary, but I didn't enjoy how I just didn't enjoy how he was just wanting to go and help out, and ultimately he was basically just sidelined for the entirety of the movie.
To be fair, though, he didn't necessarily save the fleet. He got his entire bombing squadron killed trying to take out a ship that they didn't need to take out. So that's why Leia didn't deranked him and didn't tell him, which led to Holdo not telling him the plan. Plus, we get the Holdo maneuver in this film, which the cinematography of that scene and how the audio cuts out and is completely silent, absolutely breathtaking. The throne room fight with Rey and Kylo against the Praetorian Guards, absolutely love it. Some people will point out a couple minor choreography mistakes in that sequence, but I don't think it's a big deal. I loved how this movie kind of, and it's what Rian Johnson says, subverts our expectations, because you don't expect Supreme Leader Snoke to die in the second movie of the trilogy. You think he's going to be the big bad throughout it, but that's so important to Kylo's character that he did that, and that he teamed up with Rey for that moment. Kylo Ren's my favorite character in all of Star Wars, and I could talk about him forever, so I'm gonna keep it brief here. But this was such a good movie for Kylo, and Kylo really shined in this movie. But The Last Jedi is just, it makes you think. I think it's an intellectually challenging film that if you put some thought into it, you're gonna enjoy it more than you would if you just kind of watched it on a surface level.
I gotcha.
And I think it's the second best movie behind Empire, which might be a hot take, but I'm full of Star Wars hot takes. It's kind of my thing. So, yeah.
I gotcha.
I'm going to give The Last Jedi a 10 out of 10. Dare I say it? I'm going to say it. I give it a 10 out of 10.
As it stands right now, I'm probably going to have to rewatch the sequel trilogy at some point, but as it stands to this day, I'm probably gonna stick to my guns and give it a 5 out of 10.
Wow. Wow. See, if this is any proof that The Last Jedi is the most divisive Star Wars movie that exists, there you go. So, moving on, a few months later, not even a whole year later, a few months later, we get the next spin-off film, Solo, A Star Wars Story, the Han Solo origin movie. I'm not a big fan of this movie. I think it was tried too hard to answer a bunch of questions that didn't need answered about Han's backstory. And this movie felt off to me.
I personally thought that it was a good heist movie. Like, it hit all of the necessary bullet points it needs to be a good heist movie. But as a Star Wars movie itself, it kind of lacks in certain areas. The one thing I do enjoy that it does it tries to tackle is the aspect of the scum and villainy side of things. Obviously, we don't get to see any Jedi in the film with one exception, but even then, he's not even there. So it just kind of tells you how the lowlifes of the galaxy live with the Empire still at its peak.
I think if you were going into this movie expecting kind of a Western kind of heist film, you would enjoy it. If you're expecting anything else, it might be a little off-putting, maybe. Definitely not my favorite. I do enjoy a lot of aspects of this film. I love the cast. I think Alden Ehrenreich does a great job at playing a young Han Solo, where he's not trying to emulate Harrison Ford's performance. He's kind of doing his own thing with a young Han Solo, but it works. Donald Glover as a young Lando, I think that's perfect casting.
It was the best casting I could even think of.
Yeah. And you know, I enjoyed the characters of this movie. It's the story that I wasn't huge on, and like I feel like they were trying too hard to answer questions that didn't need answered. So I'm gonna give Solo, I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
I'm going to say just for all intents and purposes, it was a film that I personally enjoyed, especially with a lot of people coming right outside of The Last Jedi. I enjoyed it a little bit more. It kind of brought me back into it, so I'd give it a 7.
Nice. Jumping to the conclusion of the Skywalker saga, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Now, funny thing about this is I had the complete opposite reaction to this movie than I did with The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, dare I say, hated it at first, but now I love it. With The Rise of Skywalker, absolutely loved this movie the first time I saw it. But now, it's definitely not my favorite. The more I think about this movie, the more problems I find with it, and the more things I find that I don't like. The story-wise, it's not the best.
No, my problem with this movie is I loved, kind of like in hindsight, Abrams clearly had a lot of questions that were meant to be answered later on, perfectly set up. And with a lot of people, it just seems like Johnson kind of knocked that over or just answered them with his own way. And this film is Abrams trying to almost play damage control and say, well, how are we going to keep Kylo Ren still on the dark side? How are we going to keep these characters doing what they would ultimately still be doing? And in some areas, it works, but a lot of the time, it just feels like it falls flat with just... I don't know. It doesn't. I was conflicted when I watched this movie at first because I watched it with my dad and I didn't know how to feel about it. It was entertaining to watch, but it just, I don't know. It kind of fell flat.
What this movie needed was to be 3 hours long, to give more time for exposition, because how did the Emperor come back? They didn't explain that in the movie.
Nope.
You know, how they needed, if Avengers Endgame could be 3 hours long, why can't the ending of the Skywalker saga be 3 hours long? That extra time would have definitely helped with exposition and kind of explain more things in the movie that needed to be explained. Another thing I don't like about this movie is one of the big questions throughout the entire sequel trilogy was Rey's parentage. Who were Rey's parents? And The Last Jedi kind of sets it up that, oh, she's nobody. Her parents aren't anything special. You know, they're dead. And I really like that because obviously Rey's a strong character, and that shows that you don't have to come from a strong bloodline to be strong. Threw that out the window with the Rise of Skywalker. Oh, let's make her Palpatine's granddaughter. I think that was a cheap excuse to justify her power, to kind of appease the people that don't like Rey as a character and that think that she was overpowered. And you know, I'm not a fan of it. I much prefer Rey being nobody and having no bloodline connections to her being related to Palpatine. It seems like a cheap excuse to just justify her power. Plus, you know, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, my favorite character in all of Star Wars, dies in this movie. That emotionally wrecked me. Same with my favorite kind of side background character, Snap Wexley, the pilot. He dies in this movie. That also emotionally wrecked me. But I will say that this movie has my favorite scene in all of Star Wars, and that's Redeem Ben Solo. And the lightsaber handoff behind the back, and then he pulls it out, does the Solo shrug, and then just goes ham on the Knights of Ren. Favorite scene in all of Star Wars, hands down. So although this movie does have my favorite sequence in Star Wars, it's not my favorite. There are a lot of things I would have changed about this movie. Plus, too, Finn's character got tossed aside this movie.
Yep.
Rose's character got tossed aside this movie.
Rose was absolutely sidelined.
And that's the thing, too, is I feel like, because a lot of people didn't like her in The Last Jedi, I feel like J.J. Abrams was appeasing those fans who didn't like Rose and just kind of threw her out. Same with Finn, too. You know, they hint that Finn is Force sensitive throughout this movie, and then they don't do anything with it.
Right.
It's funny, though, because J.J. Abrams was not originally supposed to write and direct this film. It was supposed to be Colin Trevorrow. And his script for Episode 9 actually came out. It's called Duel of the Fates. Would have been a much better movie, in my opinion. Although we don't get Redeem Ben Solo in Duel of the Fates. So would I give up Redeem Ben Solo for this film? I don't know. But yeah, Rise of Skywalker, not my favorite. Definitely a lot of things I would change. And really, it wasn't a satisfying conclusion to the Skywalker saga. I don't think the ending was satisfying.
It really wasn't. It just seemed like they had everything all set up. They've reached the climax and they're like, oh wait, we still have to tie all of this together. And they just kind of rushed everything to almost get it done. And with how it actually ends, it just seemed like, oh, okay. It just happened, and then that was that.
I will say that I read the novelization for Episode 9, and the book is much better than the movie, because the book actually kind of gives more of that exposition that the film needed. So yeah, I would give Rise of Skywalker a 7 out of 10. Not my favorite.
I think I'll have to give this one another 5.
That's understandable.
Yeah,
I understand.
It's just one of those movies. I wanted to like it going into it. I had high hopes for it because I thought Abrams was going to be going back. He was going to be on top of it. He was going to be working on it. And surely he could try to piece it together. And it just seemed like for the majority of the film, he was ultimately just doing damage control.
For as big of a Force Awakens fan as I am, I was hyped that JJ was coming back and doing this one. But he let me down. He let me down for sure.
Right.
So that's going to do it for the first episode of And Action. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I think we definitely took a little bit more time than we wanted to going over the Star Wars movies. But as the ITV's resident Star Wars fan, that does not surprise me at all. So thank you all for tuning in to the first episode of And Action. I'm Kevin Lemper.
And I'm Hunter Valenzuela.
And we will see you guys next time.